In 2014, a man named Ronald Read died in Brattleboro, Vermont. He was 92 years old. He had worked as a janitor for most of his life. Before that, he pumped gas at a service station. He drove an old second-hand car. He wore a safety pin to hold his coat together when the buttons fell off, rather than buy a new one. His friends described him as quiet, careful, ordinary. When his estate was settled, he left $1.2 million to his local library and $4.8 million to the hospital nearby. The full number was just under $8 million. He never earned a high salary. He never started a company. He never invested in anything exotic. He just saved consistently, invested the difference in dividend-paying stocks, and let compounding do what compounding does across 7 decades of patient, unglamorous habit. The local newspaper ran the story because they thought it was remarkable. A janitor, $8 million. Here's what's actually remarkable. It worked exactly the way the math said it would. Ronald Read wasn't an anomaly. He was just someone who understood the actual variable, and it wasn't income. The assumption most people carry around, and it's never really said out loud, so it's never really challenged, is that building wealth is an income problem, that it's a function of what you earn, that the people ahead of you financially got there because they make more. That assumption feels obvious. It also happens to be wrong. There are people earning $40,000 a year who are quietly accumulating wealth. There are people earning $200,000 a year who are completely broke. The difference isn't the number on the pay slip. The difference is the gap between what comes in and what goes out, and what happens to that gap. Think about it like a resource management game. In any game where you're managing resources, the total you have at the end of a turn isn't determined by how much you collected. It's determined by how much you kept. You can farm an enormous amount and still end the turn with nothing if your spending matches your income. The wealth accumulation mechanism is always the same. Income minus expenses equals investable surplus. That surplus is the entire game. Everything else is backstory. High income speeds this up. It does not create the behavior. And behavior is the actual variable. Here's the counter story, because one example doesn't prove anything. A few years ago, there was a viral Reddit thread about a guy who had been earning over $100,000 a year for more than a decade. He was a mechanic, then a foreman, decent industry, union wage, real money. And he came to the personal finance subreddit genuinely confused about why he had almost nothing to show for it. No savings, a car payment he admitted was too high, rent he justified because the neighborhood was good, subscriptions he kept forgetting to cancel, meals out several times a week because he worked hard and felt like he'd earned it. He had earned it. That was never the problem. The problem was something called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the most quietly devastating forces in personal finance. Every time his income went up, his spending went up to match it, sometimes exceeded it. He never experienced the raise. It just got absorbed into a more expensive version of the same life, and the gap between income and outgoings stayed roughly the same regardless of what the income did. He was running faster on the same treadmill and calling it progress. Lifestyle inflation isn't a personal failing. It's the path of least resistance. It's what happens by default. The culture around you normalizes spending your raise. Your social circle upgrades together. The things you were fine without start feeling necessary once you can technically afford them. None of it feels irresponsible in the moment, which is exactly what makes it so effective at keeping people behind. So what did Ronald Read actually do? And more specifically, what's the version of it that works when you're not starting at 20 years old with 70 years of runway? The method has 3 parts. They're boring, that's the point. Part 1 is the savings rate. This is the percentage of your take-home income that doesn't get spent. Financial research across decades has consistently shown that your savings rate is the most powerful variable in wealth building. More than investment returns, more than income. Someone saving 40% of a modest salary will almost always outpace someone saving 10% of a high salary over a long enough horizon. The target isn't a specific dollar amount, it's a percentage of whatever you actually earn. There's no universal right answer for what that percentage should be. 10% is the common baseline you'll hear, the one that gets recommended most. But 10% is also the floor for this to work at any meaningful speed, not the goal. If you can get to 20, 30 or higher, the compounding curve bends dramatically in your favor. The savings rate is the dial that controls everything downstream. Part 2 is what you do with it. Saving sitting in a regular account and slowly losing value to inflation is not a wealth building strategy. It's a slow bleed. The surplus needs to go somewhere that grows. For most people, that means low-cost, broad market index funds, the same ones covered in the Roth IRA video if you haven't watched that yet. It's worth your time. The specifics matter less than the consistency. Investing something every single month, regardless of what the market is doing, regardless of how you feel about it, is more valuable than any particular investment decision. Part 3 is time. This one is genuinely non-negotiable, which is why starting when you're young has a value that never fully comes back. Time is the multiplier the math relies on. Every year earlier you start is worth significantly more than any percentage point of return. Ronald Read's real advantage wasn't being a genius investor. It was starting early and never stopping. Here's the question that actually needs answering. If this is so straightforward, why isn't everyone doing it? The first reason is visibility. The rewards of consistent investing are genuinely invisible for years. You put money away, and then you check your account and it's slightly bigger, but not in a way that feels meaningful. The feedback loop is so slow that the behavior doesn't feel worth reinforcing. Compare that to spending, which gives you the reward immediately. The dopamine hits the moment you buy the thing, and the regret only lands later, if it lands at all. The human brain is not built for this trade-off by default. Choosing deferred reward over immediate reward is, honestly, difficult. Anyone who tells you it isn't being straight with you. The second reason is the money feels small. $7,000 a year sounds enormous when you're already stretched thin. Even $1,000 sounds like a stretch. But the math doesn't actually require a large number. It requires a consistent number. If $100 a month is what you genuinely have, that's the number. Compounding will still do something meaningful with $100 a month over 30 years. Less than the maximum, obviously, but not nothing, not even close to nothing, and significantly better than zero. The third reason is that nothing breaks if you don't do it. This week is fine whether you invest or not. Next month will probably be fine. The consequence of not building wealth is a future version of your life being harder than it needed to be. And that consequence is so far off that it doesn't register as urgent. There's no alarm, no notification, nothing visibly breaks. The expense of not starting feels like zero. It isn't, but it feels that way. Here's the actual tactical answer to the human brain problem. Automation removes the decision. If your savings and investment contributions happen automatically on payday before you have a chance to see the money, spend the money, or make any kind of emotional decision about it, the behavior becomes structural rather than willpower dependent. You're not choosing every month to invest. You chose once, set it up, and it runs. Most online banks let you set up automatic transfers on a schedule you define. Most brokerages, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, let you set up recurring investments into whichever funds you're using. The Roth IRA contribution can be automated too, within the annual limit, so the account compounds without requiring monthly motivation. This is the setup that actually sustains the behavior long term. Not discipline, not willpower, architecture. The system does the work, so you don't have to remember, decide, or feel virtuous about it every single time. Pay yourself first. Whatever remains after the automated transfer is what you have to spend, not the other way around. It's a small reframe, and it changes everything about how the month feels. A few specific things that derail this quietly, in order of how often they come up. Lifestyle inflation at raise time. Every time income goes up, the automatic instinct is to adjust spending to match. The better move is to adjust your savings rate upward first, even just by 1 or 2 percentage points, before any of the new money gets absorbed into lifestyle. You won't feel the lifestyle upgrade as much because you never quite got used to the previous income. The savings rate compounds. The nicer apartment doesn't. The comparison trap. This one hits harder in a social media environment than it ever has before. When the reference point for your life is everyone else's best moments on Instagram, the gap between where you are and where you feel you should be is permanently enormous. That gap gets funded by spending. Keeping up is expensive, and the people you're keeping up with are often not in the financial position they appear to be in. Starting over after setbacks. This is the one that actually matters most. Emergencies happen. Savings get wiped. Investments dip. The mistake isn't the setback. The mistake is treating the setback like a reason to stop entirely. Ronald Read lived through multiple recessions, multiple market crashes. He didn't stop. The setback is a chapter, not the ending. Getting back to the behavior as quickly as possible after a disruption is the actual skill being practiced here. Let's go back to the man in the coat with the safety pin. Ronald Read wasn't miserable. By all accounts, he was content, engaged with his community, and lived life on his own terms. He wasn't depriving himself in some crushing way. He was just clear on the difference between what he needed and what he didn't. That clarity is what protected the gap. That gap is what funded the investments. Those investments, over 60 plus years, built $8 million. The equation isn't complicated. It never was. Earn something. Spend less than that. Invest the difference. Repeat. Time does the rest. The reason it sounds too simple is because it is simple. Simple to understand, genuinely difficult to stay consistent with, and almost universally abandoned in favor of more complicated solutions that feel more exciting and deliver less. There is no high-income prerequisite. There is no special knowledge required beyond the basics. There's just the behavior, sustained across enough time for the math to work. The janitor understood that. Now you do too. What's your savings rate right now? Even a rough estimate? Drop it in the comments. Curious where most people watching this are actually starting from. No wrong answers. Here's the frame that makes this real. There are two versions of you 20 years from now. Both of them worked similar jobs. Both of them face similar income ceilings, similar economic conditions, similar unexpected expenses along the way. One of them treated every raise as permission to upgrade their lifestyle, kept the gap between income and spending roughly zero, and arrives at 60 with a life that looks fine from the outside but feels fragile underneath. The retirement account is smaller than expected. The options feel narrower than they should. The other one automated a percentage off the top from early on, adjusted it upward when income grew, left the investments alone through the down years, and never tried to time anything. That version of you arrives at 60 with choices. Not necessarily $8 million, but choices. Freedom. The ability to work because you want to, not because you have to. The only meaningful difference between those two versions is a structural decision made early enough that the math had time to work. That decision is available to you right now, not later, not when the income gets higher, now.
Open a brokerage account if you don't have one. Link it to your bank. Automate a transfer on payday. Whatever amount is real and sustainable. Put it in a broad market index fund. If you want it growing tax-free, put it inside a Roth IRA. That entire mechanic is covered in the previous video on the Roth IRA glitch. Then leave it alone. Check your savings rate. If it's below 10%, the goal for this month is to move it up, even by 1%. That's the lever. That's the dial that determines the trajectory. You know the method now. Go do it. Stack smart.